I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment in Chicago, editing photos from last weekend's engagement shoot, when my phone buzzed with a notification that would turn my world upside down. The autumn rain drummed against my single window, creating a rhythm that usually helped me focus. But something about that particular Tuesday evening felt different. The notification was from Instagram. Someone had tagged me in a story. I almost ignored it, thinking it was probably another photographer trying to get my attention. But curiosity got the better of me. When I opened it, my coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered against the hardwood floor. There, in a beautifully filtered photo, was my sister Emma in a white dress, surrounded by bridesmaids I didn't recognize, with the caption, "Final dress fitting before the big day. So excited for Emma's wedding this Saturday." The location tag read, Cedar Falls, Iowa, my hometown, the place I hadn't been back to in 3 years. My hands were shaking as I stared at the screen. Emma was getting married, this Saturday, in 4 days, and I had no idea. I scrolled through the comments, hoping this was some kind of mistake, some cruel joke the universe was playing on me. But there they were. Congratulations from people I grew up with, heart emojis from distant cousins, and worst of all, a comment from my grandmother Martha. "Our beautiful Emma, can't wait for Saturday." The knot in my stomach tightened as I realized what this meant. Not only was Emma getting married, but my grandparents, the people who raised us after Mom and Dad died, they knew. They all knew. And none of them had told me. I set my phone down and stared at the broken pieces of my mug scattered across the floor, each shard reflecting the glow from my computer screen. The coffee was already seeping into the wood, creating a dark stain that I knew would be permanent. Just like the stain this discovery was leaving on my heart. 3 years. It had been 3 years since I'd spoken to any of them. 3 years since that awful fight when I told Grandpa Robert I was dropping out of college to pursue photography full-time. 3 years since Grandma Martha called my dreams unrealistic nonsense and said I was throwing my life away just like my father had. I'd left Cedar Falls that night with 2 suitcases and a heart full of determination to prove them wrong. I'd worked 3 jobs while building my photography business, slept on friends' couches, ate ramen for months, all to show them that I could make it on my own terms. And I had made it. My wedding photography was finally taking off. I had my own apartment. I was paying my bills. But none of them knew that because none of them had tried to reach out. But Emma getting married? That was different. Emma was my baby sister, 2 years younger than me, the one I'd protected from nightmares after our parents died, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, the one who made me promise I'd always be there for her big moments. I picked up my phone again and went to Emma's Instagram profile. Her last post was from 2 weeks ago, a photo of her engagement ring with the caption, "Said yes to my forever." How had I missed this? I scrolled further back and found the engagement photos, the announcement, even photos from what looked like an engagement party. All of it happening without me knowing, without me being there. The worst part was seeing the comments from our extended family, neighbors from our old street, even my high school teachers. Everyone seemed to know except me. I felt like a ghost haunting my own family's social media, invisible and forgotten. I tried calling Emma's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Her voice sounded so mature, so different from the girl I remembered. "Hi, you've reached Emma. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you." The beep echoed through my empty apartment. "Emma, it's Nick. I just saw about your wedding. Call me back, please." I hung up and immediately tried calling my grandparents' house. The phone rang, and I could picture it sitting on the kitchen counter next to Grandma's recipe box, the same spot it had occupied for as long as I could remember. Finally, the answering machine picked up with Grandpa's gruff voice. "You've reached the Hendersons. We're not available right now. Leave a message." "Grandma, Grandpa, it's Nick. I know about Emma's wedding. I don't understand why nobody told me. Please call me back." But even as I said the words, I knew they wouldn't call back. The silence between us had grown too thick, too stubborn. Pride was a Henderson family trait, and we all had it in spades. I spent the next hour pacing my small apartment, calling and leaving messages that went unanswered. The rain kept falling, and the broken pieces of my coffee mug remained scattered on the floor like fragments of my shattered heart. Outside, Chicago hummed with its usual energy. But inside my apartment, everything felt still and cold. By midnight, I'd made a decision that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. I was going to Cedar Falls. I was going to that wedding, invited or not. Emma was my sister, and I'd be damned if I was going to miss the most important day of her life because of some 3-year-old family feud. I opened my laptop and started looking up the drive time to Cedar Falls. 8 hours. I could leave Thursday night after my last client, drive through the night and be there Friday morning. I had no idea what I'd say when I got there. No idea how they'd react to seeing me, but I knew I had to try. As I finally swept up the broken ceramic pieces, I caught my reflection in the dark window. My blonde hair was a mess, my eyes were red from crying, and I looked exactly like what I was. A woman who'd just discovered her family had written her out of their story. But underneath the hurt and anger, I saw something else. Determination. I was going home, whether they wanted me there or not. Thursday evening came faster than I expected. I'd spent the last 2 days in a strange state of numbness, going through the motions of my scheduled photo shoots, while my mind was completely elsewhere. My clients probably thought I was having an off week. I kept having to ask them to repeat poses, and forgot to check my camera settings twice. But somehow, I managed to get through Wednesday's family portraits and Thursday's senior pictures without completely falling apart. By 6 p.m. Thursday, I was throwing clothes into my old duffel bag, the same one I'd used when I left Cedar Falls 3 years ago. It felt symbolic in a way that made my chest tight. I packed my nicest dress, a navy blue wrap dress that I'd bought for a client's wedding last month, hoping it would be appropriate for whatever situation I was walking into. The drive to Cedar Falls started in Chicago traffic, which gave me plenty of time to second-guess my decision. As I sat in bumper-to-bumper traffic on I-80, watching the city lights blur past my rain-streaked windshield, I wondered if I was making a huge mistake. What if they called security? What if Emma didn't want to see me? What if this whole thing backfired and made everything worse? But then I'd remember the photo of Emma in that wedding dress, how radiant she looked, how grown up she seemed, and I knew I had to try. Even if they turned me away at the door, even if it ended in another fight, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least attempt to be there for her. Once I got past the suburbs, the interstate opened up, and I was able to settle into the rhythm of the drive. I'd forgotten how flat Illinois was, how the landscape stretched endlessly in every direction. The October cornfields were brown and harvested now, leaving behind stubbled earth that looked almost lunar in my headlights. It was so different from Chicago's constant stimulation. Out here, there was nothing but road, sky, and my own thoughts. I tried listening to music, but every song seemed to remind me of something from home. I switched to a podcast about entrepreneurship, thinking it would distract me, but the host's advice about not burning bridges with family hit too close to home. Finally, I turned off the radio entirely and drove in silence, with only the hum of my engine and the occasional semi-truck passing by. Around 11 p.m., I stopped at a gas station in Princeton, Illinois. The fluorescent lights were harsh after hours of darkness, and the coffee looked like it had been sitting there since morning, but I needed the caffeine. As I was filling my tank, an older man at the next pump noticed my Illinois plates. "Heading home for the weekend?" he asked, the kind of casual small talk that happened at gas stations in small towns. "Something like that," I replied, not sure how to explain that I was driving 8 hours to crash my sister's wedding. "That's nice. Family's important," he said, screwing his gas cap back on, especially this time of year with the holidays coming up. I nodded and managed to smile, but his words stuck with me as I got back on the road. Family is important. That's exactly why I was doing this crazy thing, driving through the night to a place where I might not be welcome. The closer I got to Iowa, the more memories started flooding back. I remembered making this drive with my parents when I was little, how Dad would play this game where we'd count red barns and grain silos. Emma would always fall asleep in the back seat, her head on my shoulder, while I stayed awake watching the landscape change from suburban to rural. After our parents died, Grandpa Robert had made this drive with us a few times to visit relatives in Chicago. But those trips had been different, quieter, sadder, full of the weight of everything we'd lost. Grandma Martha had always packed too much food, as if feeding us could somehow fill the hole our parents' death had left behind. By 2 a.m., I was fighting to stay awake. I pulled into a rest stop near the Iowa border and dozed in my car for an hour, wrapped in an old jacket that still smelled like my Chicago apartment, coffee and photochemicals and the vanilla candle I'd burned too many times. When I woke up, my neck was stiff and my mouth tasted terrible, but I was less than 2 hours from Cedar Falls. The final stretch was the hardest. Once I crossed into Iowa, everything became familiar again. The exit signs, the small towns I'd driven through countless times, even the particular way the highway curved near Waterloo. It was like traveling back in time, and with each mile marker, I felt more like the scared, angry 18-year-old who'd left this place, rather than the independent woman I'd worked so hard to become. I reached Cedar Falls just as the sun was coming up, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges that made the familiar landscape look almost magical. Main Street was empty except for a few early commuters heading to work, but everything looked exactly the same. Murphy's Diner still had the same red and white striped awning. The old movie theater still had its vintage marquee. Even the crack in the sidewalk in front of the library was still there. I drove slowly through downtown, past the high school where Emma and I had both graduated, past the park where we used to go sledding in winter. Finally, I found myself on Elm Street, sitting in my car across from the house where I'd grown up after our parents died. The white two-story Victorian looked smaller than I remembered, but it was well maintained. Grandma's flower beds were full of orange and yellow mums, and someone had hung a fall wreath on the front door. Grandpa's old Ford was in the driveway, along with a car I didn't recognize, probably Emma's. I sat there for a long time, engine running, trying to work up the courage to walk up to that front door. Part of me wanted to just knock, to face whatever happened head-on. But another part of me was terrified of the rejection I might find there. What if they slammed the door in my face? What if Emma told me she didn't want me at her wedding? Instead, I drove to the Marriott downtown and checked into a room. I needed a shower, a few hours of sleep, and time to figure out exactly what I was going to say. The wedding was tomorrow, Saturday afternoon, and I had less than 36 hours to decide how to handle this situation. As I lay in the unfamiliar hotel bed, watching the morning light creep through the curtains, I realized that coming home had been the easy part. Now I had to figure out how to bridge 3 years of silence and hurt feelings in time for my sister's wedding day. The hardest part wasn't the drive, it was what came next. I woke up in the hotel room at noon, disoriented and groggy from the drive and the emotional exhaustion of being back in Cedar Falls. The curtains were drawn tight, but I could hear the sounds of a small town Friday afternoon. Car doors slamming, people talking on the sidewalk below, the distant hum of lawnmowers. It was so different from Chicago's constant urban symphony that it took me a moment to remember where I was. After a long shower that helped wash away the road trip fatigue, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror trying to decide what to do next. I looked tired, older somehow than when I'd left Chicago. The stress of the last few days showed in the dark circles under my eyes and the tight line of my mouth. I needed information before I made any moves, needed to understand what I was walking into. I decided to start with what I knew best: reconnaissance. As a photographer, I'd learned that the best shots came from understanding your environment, from observing before acting. So I drove to Murphy's Diner, the kind of place where everyone in Cedar Falls eventually showed up, and where gossip flowed as freely as the coffee. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in, and I was hit with a wave of nostalgia so strong it almost knocked me over. The red vinyl booths, the black and white checkered floor, the smell of bacon grease and coffee, nothing had changed. Even the same waitress, Dolores, was working the lunch shift. She'd been there since I was in high school, and she looked up when I entered. "Well, I'll be damned," she said, her weathered face breaking into a surprised smile. "Nick Henderson. Haven't seen you in years, honey." I slid into a booth in the back corner, trying to stay inconspicuous. "Hi, Dolores. Just coffee, please." She poured me a cup from the pot she was carrying and sat down across from me without being invited. Classic Dolores behavior. "What brings you back to town? Heard your sister's getting married tomorrow." My heart skipped. "You heard about the wedding?" "Honey, this is Cedar Falls. Everyone knows about everything. Emma's been planning this thing for months. Your grandparents are so excited they can barely contain themselves." She paused, studying my face. "They didn't tell you, did they?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. Dolores clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "That's a shame. Family feuds are the stupidest things on earth, if you ask me. Life's too short for that kind of nonsense. Do you know anything about the wedding? Where it's being held?" "St. Mary's Catholic Church at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Receptions at the country club afterward. Emma's marrying that nice boy, David Miller. You remember the Millers? They own the hardware store? Good family." She refilled my coffee cup. "Your grandparents have been running around town all week, making sure everything's perfect. Martha's been in here 3 times fretting about the weather forecast." I absorbed this information while staring into my coffee. St. Mary's was the same church where our parents' funeral had been held. The same church where Emma and I had been baptized. The thought of her getting married there without me felt like a physical ache in my chest. "Dolores, can I ask you something? Do you know why they didn't invite me?" The older woman's expression softened. "Honey, I don't think it's that they didn't want you there. I think it's that they don't know how to reach out after all this time. Pride's a terrible thing sometimes. It keeps people from saying what they really mean." After Dolores went back to work, I sat in that booth for another hour, listening to the conversations around me. Cedar Falls was still the same small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and I heard snippets about the wedding from other customers. Apparently, Emma had looked beautiful at her bridal shower last weekend. The flowers were going to be gorgeous. Everyone was excited to see the old Henderson place all decorated for the reception preparations. Wait, the reception was at the country club, but they were doing preparations at my grandparents' house? That didn't make sense. I paid for my coffee and decided to do a little more investigating. I drove by St. Mary's first. The church looked the same as always, with its tall spire and stained glass windows that caught the afternoon light. There was a florist's van parked outside, and I could see people moving around inside, probably setting up for tomorrow. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I imagined Emma walking down that aisle without me there to see it. Next, I drove past the country club, a modest building on the edge of town that hosted most of Cedar Falls' important events. There was definitely activity there too. Catering trucks and rental company vans were parked outside. Finally, I worked up the courage to drive by my grandparents' house again. This time there were several cars in the driveway, and I could see people in the backyard. Curious, I parked a block away and walked closer, staying hidden behind the large oak tree that had been my childhood climbing spot. What I saw made my throat close up with emotion. The backyard was decorated with string lights and white fabric draped between the trees. Tables were set up on the lawn, and Grandma Martha was directing a small army of what looked like family friends and relatives in hanging decorations. Emma was there too, looking radiant in jeans and a sweater, laughing at something someone had said. It wasn't just wedding preparations. They were throwing an engagement party or pre-wedding celebration at the house. Tonight, the house where Emma and I had grown up, where we'd had birthday parties and holiday gatherings, where we'd grieved our parents and learned to be a family again. I watched Emma hug an elderly woman I recognized as our great-aunt Ruth, watched her smile and gesture excitedly as she talked about something. She looked so happy, so confident and grown up. This was supposed to be one of the happiest times of her life, and I was lurking behind a tree like some kind of stalker instead of being part of it. But as I watched, I also noticed something else. Every few minutes, Emma would glance toward the street, as if she was waiting for someone. Her smile would falter slightly, and she'd get a distant look in her eyes before someone would pull her attention back to the party preparations. Was she looking for me? Did she know I might come? I was so focused on watching the scene in the backyard that I didn't notice Grandpa Robert coming around the side of the house with a bag of ice until he was almost at the street. Our eyes met across the yard, and for a moment, neither of us moved. He looked older than I remembered, his hair completely gray now, but his eyes were the same sharp blue I'd inherited from him. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. I wanted to run to him, to apologize for everything, to ask why they hadn't told me about Emma's wedding. But I also wanted to turn and run away, to avoid the confrontation I wasn't ready for. Instead, he set down the bag of ice, said something to one of the other men, and started walking toward me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was it. 3 years of silence were about to end, and I had no idea what he was going to say. As he got closer, I could see the mix of emotions on his weathered face: surprise, uncertainty, and something that might have been relief. When he was just a few feet away, he stopped and looked at me for a long moment. "I wondered if you'd come," he said quietly, his voice gruff with emotion. "I wondered if you'd come," Grandpa Robert said, and those 6 words contained 3 years of complicated emotions. We stood there on the sidewalk, separated by just a few feet of concrete, but what felt like an ocean of hurt and misunderstanding. "You wondered?" I managed to say, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "You knew I might find out." He ran a hand through his gray hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood whenever he was struggling with how to explain something difficult. "Emma wanted to invite you. She fought us on it for weeks. But your grandmother and we thought it would be better if what? If you just pretended I didn't exist?" The anger I'd been carrying for 3 years finally found its voice. "She's my sister, Grandpa. My only sister." "You think we don't know that?" His voice rose slightly, then he caught himself and looked back toward the house. "You think this has been easy for us? You think we wanted our family torn apart?" I followed his gaze and saw that some of the people in the backyard had noticed our conversation. Emma was standing by the porch steps, her hand shading her eyes as she tried to see who Grandpa was talking to. Even from this distance, I could see the exact moment she realized it was me. Her posture changed, her shoulders tensing, and she said something to the woman next to her before starting to walk toward us. "She's coming over here," I said, panic rising in my chest. I wasn't ready for this. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times over the past 3 years, but now that it was happening, I felt completely unprepared. "Nick," Grandpa's voice was gentler now, "she's been asking about you. Every holiday, every birthday, every important moment in her life. She asks if we've heard from you." Emma had reached the edge of the yard and was walking across the street toward us. She looked so different from the girl I remembered, taller, more confident, her dark hair longer and styled in a way that made her look sophisticated. But her eyes were the same, and they were filled with a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite read. "Hi, Nick," she said when she reached us, her voice carefully neutral. "Hi, Em." The nickname slipped out automatically, the same one I'd called her since she was little. You look beautiful." Grown up. She crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive gesture I recognized from our childhood arguments. What are you doing here? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with hurt and accusation. I could feel Grandpa watching us both, probably wondering if he should intervene or let us work it out ourselves. I saw the Instagram post. About your wedding. I couldn't believe nobody told me. Nobody told you because you haven't talked to us in 3 years, Emma said, her carefully maintained composure starting to crack. You left, Nick. You walked out and never looked back. That's not fair, and you know it. I called. I texted. For months after I left, I tried to reach out, but nobody ever responded. Emma's eyes flashed with anger. You called twice in 3 years, and both times it was just to argue with Grandma and Grandpa about money or to complain about how we didn't understand your artistic vision. I felt like she'd slapped me. That's not... I called more than twice. No, Nick, you didn't. I kept track. 2 phone calls in 3 years, and the last one was over a year ago. Her voice was rising now, and I could see people in the backyard starting to stare. Do you have any idea what it's been like? Do you know how many times I've wanted to call you? How many times I've picked up the phone and then put it down because I was afraid you wouldn't answer? The pain in her voice cut through my anger and hit something deeper. Emma, I'm getting married tomorrow, she continued, tears starting to form in her eyes. The most important day of my life, and my sister, my only sister, has been a stranger for 3 years. Do you know what that feels like? Grandpa Robert cleared his throat. Maybe we should take this conversation inside, away from the neighbors. But Emma shook her head. No, we're going to finish this right here, right now. I'm tired of tiptoeing around this family's feelings. She turned back to me. You want to know why you weren't invited? It's because Grandma Martha cried for 2 weeks when we started planning the wedding. She kept saying she wished you were here, that it wasn't right to have a family celebration without you. But every time someone suggested reaching out, she'd remember how you left, how you told us we were holding you back, how you said this town and this family weren't good enough for your dreams. I felt my defenses crumbling. I never said you weren't good enough. I said I needed to find my own path. By rejecting everything we offered you, the college fund they'd been saving since we were kids, the connections Grandpa had at the bank, the life they'd planned for you. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. They didn't understand your photography thing, but they would have supported you if you'd given them a chance. They called it a phase. They said I was being unrealistic. Because they were scared. Emma's voice broke. They were terrified of losing another person they loved. They lost Mom and Dad, and then they were watching you make choices that seemed risky and unstable. They didn't know how to support something they didn't understand. Grandpa Robert stepped closer to both of us. She's right, Nick. We were scared. After your parents died, your grandmother and I, we just wanted to keep you girls safe. We wanted to make sure you had stable, secure futures. When you started talking about dropping out of college to chase what seemed like an impossible dream, it wasn't impossible, I said quietly. I made it work. I have my own business now. I'm successful. We know, Emma said, surprising me. We've been following your work online, your Instagram, your website, the features in those photography magazines. We know you made it. You've been watching my work? Of course we have. Your family. Just because we weren't talking doesn't mean we stopped caring about you. She laughed, but it was a sound full of sadness rather than humor. Grandma has printed out every article about you and keeps them in a scrapbook. She shows them to anyone who will listen, bragging about her granddaughter, the photographer. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. Then why didn't anyone reach out? If you were proud of me, if you were following my work, why the silence? Grandpa Robert looked down at his feet. Pride, mostly. And hurt. You made it clear when you left that you didn't need us, that we were holding you back. We didn't know how to bridge that gap, how to admit we might have been wrong. And I didn't know how to admit that I missed you all so much it physically hurt, I whispered. That every success felt hollow because I couldn't share it with my family. Emma's expression softened for the first time since she'd walked over. You missed us? Every single day. I wanted to call you when I got my first magazine feature. I wanted to send Grandma pictures of my apartment when I finally got my own place. I wanted to invite you all to my first gallery showing. The words were pouring out now. 3 years of suppressed emotions finally finding their voice. But I was so afraid you'd reject me again, that you'd hang up on me or tell me it was too late. It's never too late, Grandpa said gruffly. Family doesn't work that way. Emma looked back toward the house, where the party preparations were continuing, despite our emotional confrontation in the street. I wanted you at my wedding so badly. I pictured you as my maid of honor, helping me get ready, being there when I walked down the aisle. But when we started making the guest list, everyone said it would be too awkward, too risky. What if you said no? What if you came but caused a scene? What if it ruined the whole day? So you decided it was safer to just not invite me at all. We decided wrong, she said simply. I see that now. I should have called you myself, should have fought harder to have you there. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw not just the grown woman she'd become, but echoes of the little girl who used to follow me everywhere, who trusted me to protect her from the world. I'm here now, I said. I know it's last minute. I know I probably don't deserve it after 3 years of stubborn silence, but I'm here, and I want to be at your wedding if you'll have me. Emma stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing everything: the hurt, the anger, the love, the hope. Finally, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me in a hug that felt like coming home. Of course I want you there, she whispered against my shoulder. I've always wanted you there. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of perfect October weather that made Iowa look like a postcard. Crisp air, brilliant blue sky, and trees dressed in every shade of gold and crimson. I woke up in my hotel room feeling like I was in a dream, still processing everything that had happened the night before. After Emma and I had reconciled in the street, Grandma Martha had emerged from the backyard party and burst into tears the moment she saw me. The next 2 hours had been a whirlwind of explanations, apologies, and catching up with relatives I hadn't seen in years. Everyone wanted to know about my photography business, my life in Chicago, and most importantly, everyone seemed genuinely happy that I was there. But the real conversation had happened later, after the party wound down, and it was just the 4 of us, me, Emma, and our grandparents, sitting around the same kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals growing up. We'd talked until nearly midnight, working through 3 years of hurt feelings and misunderstandings. There had been more tears, more apologies, and finally, the kind of honest conversation we should have had before I left Cedar Falls. Now, as I got dressed in my navy blue dress, I felt nervous in a completely different way. I was about to watch my little sister get married, and I'd been asked to step in as her maid of honor since her original choice, her college roommate, had come down with the flu and couldn't make it from Seattle. It's like fate, Emma had said the night before. Maybe this is exactly how it was supposed to happen. I arrived at the church 2 hours before the ceremony to help Emma get ready. The bridal room at St. Mary's was small but cozy, with soft lighting and a large mirror surrounded by vintage Hollywood-style bulbs. When I walked in, Emma was sitting in her wedding dress having her makeup done by a local artist, and she looked absolutely radiant. "You made it," she said, smiling at me in the mirror. "I told you I'd be here." I set down the small bag I'd brought with me. "I brought something for you." Emma turned around, curiosity lighting up her eyes. "What is it?" I pulled out a small velvet box that I'd kept in my jewelry collection for 3 years, never quite able to part with it. It was Mom's. I took it when I left because I was afraid I'd never see it again, but I always planned to give it to you on your wedding day. Inside the box was our mother's pearl necklace, the one she'd worn in her own wedding photos. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she lifted it carefully from the box. "Oh, Nick, it's perfect. Will you help me put it on?" As I fastened the delicate clasp around my sister's neck, I was transported back to all the times I'd watched our mother get ready for church or special occasions, how elegant and beautiful she'd always looked. "She would be so proud of you today," I whispered. "She would be proud of both of us," Emma replied, squeezing my hand, for finding our way back to each other. The next hour passed quickly as we finished getting ready. I helped Emma with her veil, made sure her dress was perfectly arranged, and took dozens of photos with my phone to capture every moment. It felt so natural, so right, like this was exactly where I was supposed to be. Grandma Martha appeared in the doorway just as we were finishing up. She was wearing a soft lavender dress and looked more elegant than I'd seen her in years. But what struck me most was the peace on her face, the contentment of seeing her family whole again. "My beautiful girls," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You both look absolutely perfect." "Thank you for the necklace idea, Grandma," Emma said. "It was the perfect something borrowed." Grandma Martha looked confused for a moment. Then understanding dawned on her face as she saw our mother's pearls around Emma's neck. "Oh, honey, that's not borrowed. That's yours to keep. Both of you girls should have pieces of your mother with you always." Before any of us could start crying again, there was a knock on the door. "Ladies, it's time," called the wedding coordinator. The ceremony itself was everything Emma had dreamed of and more. As I walked down the aisle ahead of her, I saw the church filled with faces from our childhood, teachers, neighbors, family friends who had watched us grow up. David stood at the altar looking nervous and handsome in his black tuxedo, and when the music changed and Emma appeared at the back of the church on Grandpa Robert's arm, his face lit up with pure joy. But what made my heart swell was seeing our grandparents in the front row. Grandpa Robert had tears streaming down his face as he walked Emma down the aisle, and Grandma Martha was dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. They looked complete for the first time in 3 years, like a piece of their hearts that had been missing was finally back in place. Emma was a vision as she glided down the aisle. The dress was perfect for her, classic and elegant with delicate lace sleeves and a train that caught the light streaming through the stained glass windows. But more than that, she looked happy in a way that went bone deep, the kind of happiness that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. When the minister asked who gives this woman to be married, Grandpa Robert's voice was strong and clear. Her grandmother and I do, with love and pride. The ceremony was beautiful and traditional, with vows that made everyone cry and rings that caught the afternoon sunlight. But for me, the most meaningful moment came when Emma and David were pronounced husband and wife. As they kissed and everyone cheered, Emma looked directly at me over David's shoulder and mouthed, "Thank you for being here." The reception at the country club was everything a small-town wedding should be: good food, heartfelt toasts, and dancing that lasted well into the evening. I gave a maid of honor speech that I'd written in my head during the ceremony, talking about second chances and the unbreakable bonds of family. When I mentioned how proud our parents would be, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. But the moment that will stay with me forever came during the father-daughter dance. Since our dad wasn't there, Grandpa Robert stepped in to dance with Emma. As they swayed to "In My Daughter's Eyes," I watched this man who had raised us with such love and dedication, who had stepped into an impossible situation, and somehow made us feel safe and cherished even in the midst of devastating loss. Halfway through the song, Emma gestured for me to join them. The three of us danced together, Emma in the middle, Grandpa Robert and me on either side, and I felt the last of the walls I'd built around my heart finally crumble. This was my family, these people who had loved me even when I was too stubborn to accept it, who had been waiting for me to come home even when I was too proud to ask. Later, as the evening was winding down and the last guests were saying their goodbyes, Emma and I found ourselves alone on the country club's porch, looking out over the lights of Cedar Falls. She was still in her wedding dress, but she'd kicked off her heels and was barefoot like when we were kids. "I can't believe you're really here," she said, leaning against the porch railing. "I can't believe I almost missed this. I'm so sorry, Em, for all of it, for letting pride and stubbornness keep me away from the people I love most." "We're all guilty of that," she said. "But we found our way back to each other. That's what matters." I looked at my sister, this incredible woman who had somehow turned out perfect despite everything we'd been through, despite my absence from so many important moments in her life. I don't want to miss anything else. I want to be part of this family again, really part of it. You never stopped being part of it, Nick. We just forgot how to show it. As we stood there in comfortable silence, I thought about the photograph I'd take of this moment if I could. Two sisters on a wedding night, surrounded by the soft glow of string lights and the quiet peace of a small town, finally understanding that home isn't a place you can leave behind. It's the people who love you no matter how far you wander or how long you stay away. "I love you, Emma," I said. "I love you too, big sister. Welcome home." And for the first time in 3 years, I truly was home.